Okay, I'm going to, if you will, I'm going to start in Colossians 1, verse 3, go 3 through 8, okay? And I will get us to where we are, and you'll see what I mean. Okay, I'm not sure why I left all of these in there. I am talking to myself, sorry. Okay. As you can see, I started in a sentence, middle of a sentence, and we really need to have some of the words up before that. So we're going to begin First Colossians 3, chapter 1, verse 3. We always thank God, the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, when we pray for you, since we heard of your faith in Christ Jesus and of the love that you have for all the saints because of the hope laid up for you in heaven. Of this you have heard before in the word of truth, the gospel, which has come to you, as indeed in the whole world it is bearing fruit and increasing, as it also does among you, since the day you heard it and understood the grace of God in truth. Just as you learned it from Epaphras, our beloved servant. He is a faithful minister of Christ on your behalf and has made known to us your love in the Spirit. Okay, where I wanted to come back to is where the yellow highlight is at. This idea of the whole world had been taught the gospel. In saying that, I think he's mostly including the Colossians, that he knows that they heard the gospel. And so his teaching from now on is going to reflect that. He's going to come from a base of you knew the gospel or you know the gospel, you are living according to it, but there's some things that are going to start happening among you that may challenge that, okay? And some of them still exist. Some of these things that were troubling them in some ways still exist today, and while may not plague whole areas of the country, we do find people who follow some of these beliefs, and so we'll talk about that a little more. That was just a lead-in, okay? That was the ad, okay, for the class. So this idea of bearing fruit and increasing, as it also does among you, I think is probably it's a positive statement made by Paul of the Colossians. This is probably the highest or the maybe the most positive that he makes with them. The rest of the time, he's not going to actually state what he's talking against. You have to surmise if this is what he's teaching, here's what the problem was. Okay, and so I'm going to do my best to see if we can play that out when we go through this chapter and probably mostly the next chapter. In the first chapter, in verse 14, we find that producing fruit is actually referenced as those who are redeemed. In other words, we see fruit here are redeemed people, right? I mean, that's what he's talking about here in these verses. The success of the word in Colossae occurred because, many had heard and knew. And you're going to find those words somewhat associated together, because hearing, if without acceptance or without understanding, is not going to help you. And so you'll find that in most cases here, he will tie those together. They heard, they knew, they know, they understand, etc. Right? The blessings of God's grace when it was first declared to them. So I think Paul is basically saying, you've heard the gospel. I'm going to use that as we confront some of these issues later on. So how does the gospel bear fruit? How does it do that? Fruit of the gospel, we'll say. Well, what did we just say? All right, okay. I'll show you that I can change. All right? So the answer is not B anymore, but it's by growing and producing the redeemed people, saved people. Same thing today, right? Isn't the fruit of the gospel today saved people? So that hasn't changed from this time when he was writing this to them, and modern days, modern times. And we have heard the gospel too. Maybe there's some things that we still want to learn. It's hard to open the Bible and not find a place that doesn't have something in there that you want to learn more about. But we certainly understand what the gospel is today because of the word that's been left for us. And many of them had it done by word of mouth, right? By teaching and preaching. And it seems that many believe that it was Epaphras that did it, that probably brought that to them more than Paul. The 12th verse talks about Epaphras being one of them, 4:12. And so maybe he had first been the one to go there and to teach. It's unclear. Where we lose him is, okay, so if he's at Colossae, how come he's now at Rome? Okay, how come he's with Paul while he's in prison? We kind of lose that connection there a little bit, but it appears that possibly he, and this is all, I want to say this is conjecture. They don't act like it is, but it feels like conjecture to me. And so they think maybe when he was there, he saw what was happening, some of the false teachers that were coming in among them, and he didn't know what to do with all of that. So he sought Paul out. We don't have all the words that it would take to state that directly, but it makes sense. There's some sense, I guess, in that. And so when these hurtful heresies started to kind of creep in among the brethren there and causing harm, he might have gone somewhere to look for help. And okay, sorry. Let me get you caught up with me this time. All right. So any question or any comments about that? Because I think, in modern times, we can track, I'm always amazed, on TV, they can get your phone and all of a sudden they know, where you're born and, what you ate for dinner last night and everything. Of course, it's probably not quite that good, but they can kind of track where you've been. We didn't have GPS, right, in those days, so we really don't know. And it's not next door. So, it's not an easy trip. So it had to be a trip made on purpose. So that's my guess concerning that. So what role does he play? What role does Epaphras play in the Colossians' faith? We think he's the one, a faithful minister, someone that was taught, that had carried that gospel message to them. Okay. Well, I did want to say a couple of things here. If we could just pause for a second. There are a couple of, let's say, religious movements that one has a seed at this point. Two of them have seeds that are planted kind of at this point. One doesn't really grow. They really don't think the Gnostic big impact didn't happen till later, okay, than this book. But some of the seeds are there. And it seems that maybe that area was a little bit more prone to believing, let's call it, I'm not going to call it conspiracy theories, let's just call it humanist ideas, okay? And, one of the things that this Gnosticism did at the time was, it's Greek for to know, okay? I mean, that's what the word means. It's Greek to know. And they thought that there was some kind of special, mysterious truth that only a certain segment of people would ever be able to understand. And that's what it took there's sort of an elite segment, if you will, of humanity that would be able to be saved. Salvation would come then through gaining this special intuitive knowledge that you would have to be a special person to be able to do, to understand. And of course, we know that the gospel is fairly easy to understand, but they wanted to involve mysticism and philosophies and so on in their belief. Now, you have some of that today. I mean, many religious organizations, sometimes you don't even recognize the Bible in what they believe, and they've left the Bible behind. And that's not unique, right, to humanity, because they did that then. I didn't want to get into all of the beliefs of it. To me, you could have a study all on its own, looking into some of these errant religions of the time. But I think one of the most egregious impacts that it had on them was they wanted to make Jesus an inferior spiritual being. And they really didn't believe that he physically came to the earth, that it was a aspiration, right? Like a ghost, okay, walking. And some denied the very existence of Christ's physical body. In other words, an apparition. That's right. All right. They would sometimes claim that it was an apparition, but all of that was really, I think, on intent to reduce the value or reduce what Jesus had done, for mankind, and turn it more than toward a humanist standpoint. Let's read these verses. And so, from the day we heard, we had not ceased to pray for you, asking that you may be filled with the knowledge of his will and all spiritual wisdom and understanding, so as to walk in a manner worthy of the Lord, fully pleasing to him, bearing fruit in every good work and increasing in the knowledge of God. And so this is kind of the beginning, if you will, of this sort of a low-key debate that Paul is going to have with false teachers and their doctrines. And so he starts off, like often he does, doesn't he, in kind of establishing some goodwill with those that he's writing his letters to. And he starts here with a prayer, right, that he wants them to, he's praying for them to have spiritual wisdom and understanding. And it's going to take that to really go through the rest of the book, I think. A strong emphasis here is on the differences between knowledge and wisdom of the gospel, the intellectual progress, if you will, of those that held this superior Gnostic philosophy. It's kind of, you're going to find that sprinkled through the rest of this. And there's another SNA, okay, Judaism is also another, let's call it a religion, okay, that has some basis that's beginning in this time period. You find both of those kind of walked through by Paul through this book. And instead of spiritual wisdom and understanding, or filled with the knowledge of God's will, they wanted you to be knowledgeable about, their own, what their ideas were concerning man and God and so on. They did not believe in God. As a matter of fact, they worshiped they had some beings they made up that they would worship, and so on. So while I think sometimes when we hear about those sorts of beliefs, we may kind of scoff at the impact of that. But when you're living in a time with a heavily Greek-based influence, you find a lot of mysticism, some Asian, some even Greek, from the Greek philosophies and so on, that impacted them. So what does Paul pray for the Colossians to receive? A special knowledge coming from that only that person, that individual can understand? Or knowledge of God's will? All right, so I think that's where he's going to return to, because if I were to try to put one label on the defense Paul's going to make in this book, is the superiority, as I have here at the top, the superiority of Christ over all these man-made ideas and even the law, because we'll talk about that in chapter 2. Let's read these verses. He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For by him all things were created in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, all things were created through him and for him. And he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. And he is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that in everything he might be preeminent. Can you see that, Paul is basically laying out, without, let's say, starting a debate with someone, but laying out his fact-based statements about God, about Jesus, and about them as beings and spiritual beings and so on. It seemed that the human philosophies that were introduced in Colossae had no place for Jesus in it, okay, as a Savior especially. Man, for the most part, according to them, was charged with redemption on his own. You basically save yourself. Now, have you ever come across anyone who, when you have some kind of a religious, conversation with them, have they ever said, "Just done this"? Okay, when you're talking about God, do you believe in God? And they do this. What do you think that means to them? It's me. Okay, it's us. Okay, we're God. We're our own God. And that's while not specifically how they were presented it, that's kind of how we would live it, right? If we wanted to accept their beliefs, we would have to think that, right? We would have to think God is all through and in all of us, and his energy is all in and through all of us, and therefore we're all God. But we know that Jesus is the principal center of salvation, isn't he? And that without him and without his place in God's plan, we would not have forgiveness of sins. And so we see that it's a direct confrontation with their beliefs. He begins then to... Okay, yes.
I don't know that it's just the Gnostics. I think Jesus is a problem in the sense that it's a miracle that we don't understand. Divine taking on human form is miraculous. But then the further problem is, if Jesus, who's God, took on human form and died for us, was resurrected, the irony of the cross thing forces us to confront some really difficult truths about ourselves. And so we have to come up with an explanation for Jesus, or we have to completely change who we are. And so I think it's almost human nature to try to take some of the benefits that we see in Christianity, the hope, the forgiveness, and those things, but without the cost that it is to us, which is emptying ourselves as Jesus emptied himself. So, there's this conundrum that Jesus presents to all of us, and we try to figure out a way to understand it and wrap our minds around it, because that's more palatable rather than the complete giving over of who we are to him, that's what he did for us, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
you know, like Gnosticism or these different beliefs that they had, I think some of that is just a natural outpouring of humans trying to reconcile themselves to the facts that they were presented with about Jesus that are so difficult and so demanding.
I can see that, yes. And I think Paul tries. He tries to explain this
Right.
in these verses. So I want to walk through some of these. There's, I think, five points, 5 reasons, let's call it, why you should refute or you should not believe this, alternate view or belief, right? Okay, reason 1. And see, to Paul, he presents these as, well, of course, this is a fact, okay? And I think what you're saying, Jason, is, yeah, but as a person hearing it, okay, you still have to find a place to deal with that, right? Somehow. So, but Paul's going to present it like, here are the facts, okay? And he believes it 100%. So here he says he's the image of the invisible God. And it's an image that's more than a resemblance. It's an expression of God on earth, right? The invisible God. And I think that we see here that there's really no difference among the 3, right? Which they want to make different. Right? I think that we have to accept some of these because they're stated, but we don't know how to make it all work in our human minds. In John 17:21, we find that all the 3 God of the Godhead are one mind, okay, and one purpose. And so you can't have Jesus be some lower being and God be the ultimate, okay, because that's not what the Bible supports in that way. It supports them each being part of the Godhead. Yes, they have their individual places, but where responsibility is divided, one acts as the Father, one as the Son, one as the Spirit, but they're referenced as one. And we know that prior to his incarnation, or him walking the earth, the yet-to-be human Jesus was the Word. The Word was with God. And so when he became flesh, he also became the Son of God, referenced as the Son of God. And so I think this is let's say, the beginning of his argument. Okay. Then we go on to the second reason. He's the firstborn of all creation. He was there at the beginning. He was not a created being, and that also flew in the face of what they were trying to say. They were trying to say he was a created being. Okay, and that's what some of the false teachers were trying to present to them. And so we see him always being there from the very beginning, and the very things we can see, touch, feel, or not see, or touch, or feel, were created with him in attendance and him participating in that. And there's a whole lot more we could say, of course, about that. Reason 3, he points out that he was the creator of everything that was created. So by him, everything we know, what we can see or not see. No matter what it was and no matter what it is, he was there at the time it was created. It's always interesting to me when, and like in verse 17, where he talks about all things are held together. Have you ever heard anyone, an apologist, talk about that from David from a mathematical standpoint, but also from just sheer what would you call it? Chance. Okay, we like to talk about chance. The chance of what we see happening. Okay, and they try to measure it and they try to talk it in terms of mathematics and so on. But we are so positioned, so perfectly organized to not just exist as we do, but we can take some hits and still keep on looking, keep on ticking, as Timex used to say, right? And so let's go on to number 4. Yes, Ray.
It's not just the Gnostics that were having this problem. In our time, you might come across Jehovah's Witness doctrine or other types of doctrines that do say that Jesus was created being rather than over creation. This passage is a good one to keep in mind when you're talking about that.
Good point. Well, there's a lot we could talk about their teaching too, because they're very much, basically, they're humanists, really, when it comes right down to it. So reason 4, everything was made for him. Okay, so everything was created through him, and he owns it. Okay, so everything was created through him, and it was done for him. Okay, and by him, for him, with him, however you want to, state that. Not only were all things created in his pre-earthly existence, right, because earth wasn't here, but also everything was made for his benefit, and what benefited him also benefited whom else? God and the Spirit, right? Because they were there with him. Let's see, I think this may be the last one. Reason 5, because he existed before any created things existed. And so when you think about that, in general, okay, apologists today, if they want to be contrary, will just can't answer. They cannot answer, where did the matter come from by which we are made? It had to have been created by someone, right? The apostle touches then, in this case, on the eternal presence then of the Lord. He obviously created everything. Obviously, he existed prior to anything that was made, but he was participating in it being made. But Christ and some of these false philosophies that they were trying to portray, they tried to portray Christ as a creature inferior to the true God, who alone was eternal. And we know that that's not the case. Now, there are other religions today who want to place Jesus in a more inferior position also. Okay, want to just call him an apostle, a good man, just a disciple. Okay, but we see the Bible does not really support that. I was wrong. Okay, so he maintains everything that he has made. All right, that's pretty important, don't you think? I mean, everything got made and put in its place and started spinning, and nature just started doing its thing. But it does its thing because he keeps the maintenance, or however you want to put it, he keeps it in, and he keeps it held together and working as it should. There's another, I think, Vine says the actual literal meaning of that phrase is, by him all things stand together. Okay? And so think about that. The fact that we don't spin out and end up, heading toward the sun, is because all of what has been done to hold us in place has someone that ensures that it does that. Do I know how it happens? No. I don't know how he does all of that. We know that. Well, and there's a lot of things. I mean, like, I don't know if you realize, but the magnetic pole has shifted, okay? And it has been shifting for, I want to say, about 60 years. And it stopped, and now it's shifting back the other direction. And so the magnetic pole generally comes from what's going on inside the Earth, okay? The magma, the content, okay, what's happening inside the Earth, and then it changes not the axis, but where magnetic north is. Okay? So if you pinned magnetic north on your GPS, 30 years ago, and then tried to go there today and find it, you won't find that spot. It's now moved. Okay? Not much. Well, this is a little bit more than over time. Okay, it's a measurable distance now. But it would, if it did too much, it would change the shape of the Earth and have to impact the axis. Okay, then he's got a seventh one. He is the head of his church. Okay, and so now we can bring this forward, can't we? We can bring the point that he's trying to make, that Jesus is everything and has always been there and has always been a participant in creation and with God. And he is the head of the body of the church. Okay? And that's what Paul wants them to recognize, that no matter what all of these other ideas are that's floating around out there, we have to keep in mind that Jesus is the head of the church. And it's there's some other aspects to this that we might talk about a little bit later, because their teachings get a little more complex than this as we go through Colossians, and so we'll address that when we can. So, how does Christ's role as image of the invisible God affirm his divinity? Good guess. So he's the visible representation on earth of God. And, I don't know how far to take some of it, but some of what is said, the phrases that are used, like, if you've seen me, you've seen God. You've seen the Father. Is it the spiritual side? Is it his way of life, what he brings to us? We have no idea what God looks like. And the person who got the closest to it almost died because of that. So, or at least he scared everyone that was around him. All right, so continuing then, verse 19. For in him all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell. Now we're talking about in Jesus. And through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether on earth or on heaven, making peace by the blood of his cross. And you, who once were alienated and hostile in mind, doing evil deeds, he is now reconciled in his body of flesh by his death, in order to present you holy and blameless and above a reproach before him. If indeed you continue in the faith, stable and steadfast, not shifting from the hope of the gospel that you heard, which has been proclaimed in all creation under heaven, and of which I, Paul, became a minister. This whole idea that will later be referenced or referred to as a mystery, okay? The God had one purpose in mind, okay? And it was the formulation of this mystery that has now been revealed to the Gentiles of the incarnated Son coming to earth and basically purifying or providing us a way to be purified in God's eyes. And I think that these verses are meant to try to cement in the minds of the Colossians just the value, what you would lose if we did not have Jesus as the Son of God. and the fact that we are reconciled because he did come here in the flesh, and by his death, the death of that mortal flesh, was a requirement for us to be able to be presented as a holy and blameless and above reproach, before God. Okay? And so, he wants them not to lose track of that, right? This idea, and so he's going to, I think, use this, these teachings as we go through. The Godhead, this idea here of being enemies. You were once alienated, or some versions say enemies, and hostile in mind, doing evil deeds. Okay, they needed forgiveness, and he wants to make sure that they understand this, because he's going to continue to use this idea as a place from which to and teach them. Okay, they need to know, and they need to accept that they at one time were enemies in their mind. They needed forgiveness, and Paul discusses a little more about this in Romans chapter 1, but he just, there basically describes pagan hearts filled with lust and vile passions, etc., that had to be forgiven. So he paints that picture for them, word picture for them, in this case. Okay, we're going to pick up with 22, because I think we have to go through these verses here. Thank you.